I'm so glad we could be back together again today. The sun's not out, but the clouds are just perfect above us. Keeps the sun off this bald head of mine, but also it's still beautiful all around me. Pond behind me, and of course the woods and stuff, and the changing leaves, starting just a hair of change in them, and colors behind us, reds, yellows, and all that that's behind us. It excites me just to be here. Just can spend some time with the Lord, walking around, talking to Him. Before we get into the Word, so I enjoy it so much out here, and I appreciate John Painter allowing me to come out and film out here. It has been such a pleasure, and I hope to continue doing it. I hope to continue doing it even through the winter, and as we see the spring come in and things begin to change out here, folks. We are seeing some enormous change in our own nation. It has been something else to watch this political upheaval right before my eyes, and to see exactly what's happening with our candidates and them, fighting against one another, trying their best to show their, one particular viewpoint or another viewpoint, and all this, and seeing all this going on. What it really boils down to in America today, as far as our choices is going to be, capitalism and socialism, whether we're going to allow our freedoms to be taken away or not. It really boils down to something as simple as that. There are tons and tons of things to look at, sure. And there's all kinds of metrics and polls and plans and all those things that we sometimes have to look at. But I'm going to tell you something, guys. It really just boils down this election to capitalism versus socialism. And I'm afraid that over half the nation may very well want to be socialist, and that's an awful shame. But here's the thing: seeing where our nation is morally, seeing where our nation is in our schools, seeing where our nation is in finances, seeing where our nation is with its lust for power, seeing where our nation is in a ton of different areas that are completely against God's word, seeing where we are in those things, whether it's lifestyles, whether it is our motivations, whatever it may be that's defying God, seeing us in that point makes you want to think, man, couldn't we get a group together who could sit down and begin a plan of attack? And I don't mean a physical attack. Couldn't we get enough people together that, and I mean in the thousands, where we could get together and begin to plan a way to take back America? And to take back America, if you're talking about 10%, you end up taking back America. And what I mean by taking back America is this: you're never going to have perfection. You're never going to have it exactly the way you want it. And on this side of heaven, there's always going to be evil that's fighting good. But we got to get enough good fighting against the bad to at least push it back. Because right now we don't have that very thing. 50-50 is not going to cut it, folks. And I'm not talking about Republican, Democrat. I'm talking about people who believe what the Word says and don't believe what the Word says, and in those things. So here's our problem. Here's our problem. We don't have enough people who are willing to do the work. Whether it's something in church where we're trying to find volunteers to help, whether it's actually standing for an issue and seeing who have the guts to do that and not worry about what comes against them. Because it's really easy to talk, as long as we have our freedoms, it's really easy to talk about what we believe in, and then turn around and say, hey, well, nothing's going to happen from that. But once you start getting threats, once you start getting a little scared, once they start telling you this, or this, once they start maybe even bribing you or pulling you out of the picture completely, you won't stand up for those issues any longer. I'm hoping that we will. I'm hoping that we will form a group of people who not only believe the Word. It's hard enough to find them, but not only believe the Word, but believe that we can push back against evil in this nation. I think that if you are spending time watching a short video on Sunday morning, a Bible study, I can just about bet you are willing to fight this fight with me. So I hope you will. And over the next few years together, as we continue to study and as we continue to preach and teach and all those things like that, then what I want to do in the midst of that is I want to begin this plan. I want to push toward this plan, and I want to push back against evil. That's why we're in Ezra and Nehemiah. As we get to Nehemiah today, and we see all that's happening in our world today and all that's happening in the political realm, we look back at Ezra and Nehemiah and go, man, this is exactly what's happening with us, only we don't have the physical upheaval that most people see and experience. We don't have that, but we do have the Word telling us that the entire wall that was around Jerusalem was in shambles. It was torn down. It was in pieces. The gates that had the wooden parts of the gates had been burned up by fire. So we see all this, And we understand what they must have been feeling back then. Some of them with their hands thrown up, not worrying about what was happening around them. Some of them, it had been like that for so long, for 70 plus years, and now they did see the temple was rebuilt, but rebuilding his walls seemed like too big of a thing to handle. So everything is down, it's destroyed, that the wall is a mess, the temple has been rebuilt, but they're looking out there and they realize this wall is an absolute mess. Nehemiah says, we're going to go back in and we're going to figure this out. When we left off last week, we realized that he had gone into Jerusalem, but Nehemiah didn't go in with a big announcement. He didn't go in with a big announcement saying, hey, I'm going to be doing this, and we're going to be doing this and this and this. What he did is he went in and he took an assessment. That's what we need to do as Christians. We need to sit back, take an assessment of where, and there are plenty of people doing this. There are plenty of good Christian people doing this. Assessing where the nation is right now and the direction that we're going, and seeing what we can do to push back against those things. So here we are. Let's look at Nehemiah chapter 2. We're going to start with verse 11. We actually were in verse 11 last week, but we're going to start with verse 11 this week, and then we'll move forward. It says, so I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. So he gets there. He is in prayer. He's trying to figure things out. He's been given the go-ahead. He's been given the money available. He's been given the trees he needs. He's been given all of that. All of that is right there at his taking, and right there for him to be able to grab hold of and to do something with. You see, all the resources in the world are ours. They're all ours. They're all the Christians, because everything belongs to the Lord. And it's not just this. We talked a little bit about it last week. We talked about the fact that God and everything that's around us belongs to Him. So then there is this: the resources belong to us, and that's not to say that we can go in and just take from other people. It means that when we pray, it's like, Lord, we need the resources for this, and this. And we're moving forward in this ministry. We believe He's telling us to do this. We believe He's given us we believe You've given us the goal to do this, and You've given us the dream and the vision to do this. So we're going to need Your resources, God, to help us with this. So would You, Lord, in the midst of all that's happening in our world, would You please give us the resources to move forward? He had done that for Nehemiah. So Nehemiah knows, he's sitting there, he knows he's going to have some adversaries and such. We talked about them, Sanballat and Tobiah last week. And there's one more we'll add this week. But he knew there were some adversaries, but what he wanted to do is he wanted to assess the situation. How bad is it really? And he took those 3 days to look at that. Verse 12 says this, and I arose at night, because he didn't want anybody to know his plans yet. And I arose at night, I and some few men with me, neither told I any man what my God had put on my heart. I said, God had put this on his heart. God has put something on your heart. And if He's put that on your heart for you to do, sometimes when we're looking at this, we need to sit back and plan carefully about our next steps and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. All right, so he says, I came as I and some few men, neither told I any man what God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. He didn't take a lot of animals with him or anything like that. He and a few men went out. He was on his animal. He was kind of walking around with this animal, checking things out. He was seeing rubble after rubble, torn down after torn down. And it says this in 13. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. So here's the thing. Pastor Rex is over the next few weeks is preaching a sermon series that he loves, and Pastor Rex is preaching it that Pastor Keith wanted him to preach. He is preaching about those different gates that were there in Jerusalem when Nehemiah was there and walked through. Here is the valley gate, okay, because it looks over the valley of Kidron. And so when they're at the valley gate, this is an entry level for most folks. But then he also, as he's walking around, this means that the dung gate's also on the south port. You say the dung gate, that's exactly right. That, of course, was their sewage area where they take all the refuse and the trash and all that kind of thing. And it had a path straight down to Gehenna, where Gehenna, we get that word as far as our hell is concerned. But that's where they would, there was all kinds of pagan sacrifice. There was all kinds of human sacrifice at times. It was awful mess, and it was, bodies were sacrificed. It's where the trash was. It's where it all burned. And the smell and the stench of all the sewage and all the garbage and all the burning and all this different stuff was right there. And see, here's one thing we can think about. Think about Jesus using that as his analogy for what hell is going to be like. Think about that. Just the miserable nature of a place like that. But But here's where Nehemiah is. Nehemiah is going into this gate. He goes into this gate. He sees, as he's going around, he sees the dung gate. He sees all of that. It's just the traveling around. He's taking these people and these animals all the way around this wall because he wants to take an assessment of every piece, every little bit of this. He wants to make sure that he is that he understands the nature and the extension, all of that stuff, where he will see everything they have to do. First of all, think about it, guys. If you have something that's been destroyed, think about a tornado, for instance, or even an earthquake or something. But a tornado, especially when a tornado comes through and starts whipping around and tearing stuff up and twisting stuff, and we've had it here in Thomaston quite a bit. In the past few years, we've had tornadoes coming and such. And I'm going to tell you something. When we see the destruction that can be allowed from one of those that can happen, here's the thing. First thing you got to do before you can ever rebuild is clean up. And see, this stuff had been here for a long time. It had been here for a long time. And so he's seeing all these piles and everything. He's like, well, the very first thing we got to do is do some cleaning up. And I would say that of Christians today, as we're starting to try to rebuild America and hopefully not just hide out in our houses, but get out and teach others about Jesus and see a culture change in an amazing and a huge way. I want us to be that type of person, but hopefully we realize there's got to be some cleaning up of our own house first before we can even start rebuilding. We got to clean up our own house. We got to clean up our own act. We got to clean up what we're involved in. And so in the middle of all this, Nehemiah is saying, the very first thing I got to do is I've got to clean up all this stuff that I see all the way around here. The massive amount of people it would take in order to work those walls. And the money it would take to be able to pay all of these people. Some of them may have come in there and said, listen, I want so much for our heritage to be restored. I want so much for our heritage to be restored. So I'll do whatever. I'll volunteer as much as I can. But many of them were paid. Nehemiah had the king's treasury. He had all of those things, and he was moving forward. That's why it's so important, folks, for our giving to continue. Our giving must continue because ministry is going to continue. Whatever your choices in life may be when it comes to your church or how you're handling things and all that, we have to continue to give, whether we're volunteering physically, which we ought to be doing too, but whether we're volunteering physically or not, we have to continue to give financially so that we can be a part of so many other different ministries. Our church, and I'm sure your church or whoever may be watching in another church, let me tell you, I'm sure you're all doing this, but in our church we have so many different little ministries that we help that can get out and help other people, that build for people, that love on people, that benevolence for people, all that kind of thing like that. We have to continue to give in the midst of that. So Nehemiah has a huge undertaking. Everything's in shambles. He is going around, he's looking around at this stuff, and he realizes there's a lot of work ahead of me. These gates have been consumed by fire. We've got to rebuild gates. We've got to rebuild walls. We've got to rebuild it with stone and masonry. We've got to rebuild it with wood. We've got to rebuild these gates with wood. We've got to have all kinds of metals. I'm telling you, he had a huge undertaking. Let's look at verse 14 for a moment. Verse 14 says this, Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Look, there's a mess here. He's trying to get around eventually, so he gets off of this animal. You'll see in just a minute. But he gets off of this animal, he begins to walk around and look. I mean, there's so much rubble and trash and everything else, they couldn't get past it right here. But surely he probably found another route at some other time. But I mean, at that point, he was just like, let me get off here and let me begin to walk on the wall with you guys, probably walking over the rubble and probably seeing everything like it is. All right, let's look. Verse 14, verse 15. Then went I up in the night by the brook and viewed the wall and turned back and entered by the gate of the valley and so returned. So we say he took a full 360-degree look at everything that was happening. That's exactly what Christians have got to do. In your own family as a watchman, in your own town as a watchman, especially in your church as a watchman, you've got to take a 360-degree view, see what's happening around you, see what's going on, take a long look, talk to the people around you, say, okay, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? How do we fix this? We've got to have those groups meeting on a regular basis to say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. And if you don't get it accomplished in the first generation, that the second generation takes up where you've left off and they keep going. This is not a fight where we can take retirement. It's just not. The Christian fight is not one that we're done at a certain age and we stop. It's not, and by that I mean you've got to always be involved. You say, well, I've served my time in church. No. You've got to always be involved. You've got to want to be involved in this fight. And it is a fight. Even the fun stuff that a church does, even the silly and fun stuff that we do, is a matter of fellowship and a matter of reaching out to people. So you're going to need to be a part of those things. And Nehemiah took a full 360-degree look, traveled all the way around it, and saw, man, oh man, we're in the biggest mess I've ever seen. And folks, that's the thing. He had never seen anything like that. He had seen the Persian king come in, use him as a wine taster. He had it made. He was living in the palace. All of these things. And he hadn't seen destruction like this, except from the Persian side coming in and destroying stuff and such. But he had never seen this. He had been given a matter on his heart that he had to work toward. And folks, I'm going to tell you, if you don't feel a burning inside of you to see this culture return to godliness, at least enough godliness to push back the evil, because we have so much out there that we're constantly fighting it. But if you're don't have a passion to see revival come, to see God work in so many beautiful ways, to see your loved ones saved, and if they get saved, they're going to catch somebody else at their salvation, I'm telling you, friends, you don't want to be in a situation where you have not given your all to Jesus Christ. It was damage, listen, and he could see this. Because there was damage to those walls and they were down, the esteem, the reproach that was put upon the Jewish people is amazing. All right, look at this. All right, verse 15, verse 16. And the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. He had not told anybody what was going on. He had not told them yet. He was still taking an assessment. He said, okay, this is what we've got to do. This is why we've got to do it. And this is how we've got to do it. So he's taking an assessment of it all. Look at verse 17. Listen to me. If you've got a problem in your family, I know I keep talking on a national level, but all this is true at the micro level. You know, there's the macro and the micro. You're going to get into the micro level. You say, well, there's a problem in my own heart. Well, then take a 360-degree view of your life. What in your life needs to change? What in your life, now, that detail, that little thing that you need to begin to tweak, maybe a big thing that you need to chop out, and you say, I need to replace it with a little bit of Jesus. I need to replace it with a godly attribute. I need to get rid of this, and I need to replace it with this. Because if you don't replace it, that vacuum is going to be filled by either God or the devil. So you want to make sure that vacuum is filled by God. Now, I'm not talking about the Spirit of God. I'm talking to Christians here when I'm saying this. I'm saying you want to 360 view of yourself, and then you say, well, there's something wrong in my family. We'll take a 360-degree view of your family. What is it? Begin to work in that area and do what you have to see the improvements there with the help of God. You say, well, I'm seeing problems in my town. Okay, well, let's start working there. 360-degree view of your town, your state, your country, this world, theology as a whole, whatever it may be. Whatever it may be, same principle. He's looked around. He said, I haven't told anybody yet. That's what Nehemiah says. I haven't told the rulers, nobody. I haven't told any of them. Then he says this, verse 17. Then said I unto them. So he's finally ready. He took that trip. He took the 360-degree view. He says, I'm ready to tell everybody what my idea is. Here we go. Here we go. When you finally decide that's what you're going to do, this is what you run into, folks. I mean, it's just true. It's what you run into. Then I said unto them, ye see the distress that we're in, how Jerusalem lieth in waste. Can't you see it, folks? Can't you see that we're lying in waste? And the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. You say, well, Ryan, what in the world do we mean by that? Well, here's the thing. Nehemiah was determined. Nehemiah was absolutely determined to get this done. All right? So he comes in and he's going to motivate them. And this is what he says. He says, guys, let's get going. We've been the laughing stock of this whole place for so long. Let's get going. Let's rebuild the walls. Let's make it happen. Let's make this happen. So Ryan, he just kind of jumped on it. Yes, he did. He went to as many leaders as he possibly could at that point. And he said, look, we have been a reproach for too long. Ryan, what does that mean? it means they had laughed. They had said, look what happened to the Jews. They used to have this big bad God that nobody could touch and all this kind of stuff. And look what we did to them. We crushed their walls. Their walls are down. It's insanity. I don't know why they think they're going to get away with rebuilding these things again. These are the enemies talking and all of that. But here's the thing. What they don't realize is the very God they're mocking is the one that judged them. Like, for example, if something ever happens to America, they're going to say, oh, this American God, this Christian God, look what happened to America. It just totally fell apart. And they ain't got anything. They ain't got a constitution anymore. The people running around scared, starving to death, all this different stuff. Yeah, that was some God, the Christian God is. Look what happened to America. When, in fact, it was God himself that brought judgment upon Israel. Just like it's God himself who can bring judgment upon America. And he'll do it just as quickly, folks. So let's don't sit back and say, oh, my goodness gracious, God's going to get us through. We're not have to worry about any of this mess, folks. We may very well have to worry about America collapsing because God may allow it just to bring his people back to him. He's not about the red, white, and blue like we are. I mean, he's given us a love for our country, praise God, and he certainly gave us the Constitution. Not God breathed, but he used people to put a document down that was incredible. That's incredible. And so we look at that and we just take it for granted a lot of times. But Nehemiah was determined. He was determined to see this happen, to see this rebuilding happen. He's like, guys, we got to be motivated. We got to motivate ourselves and get going. And look, motivation, not all of it. I get it. We got to have an assessment. We got to have a plan. We got to have all of those things. And whatever that area is of your life that you need to begin to work on now, make that plan, get that going. But the motivation is not just enough. I mean, you can motivate an idiot. All you got then is a motivated idiot. I mean, you want to make sure you're teaching them why they're having to do this. Nehemiah says, we don't want to be a reproach anymore. We don't want to be a laughing stock anymore. We want to be people that God can trust to bring back his reputation. Now, of course, God is all about his own reputation. But I mean, at the same time, bringing glory back to him, we still are supposed to do that. Anything we do that's great is simply because God gave us the opportunity to do it and gave us the power to do it. So here he is. He's determined to get back into this. You don't want to look. You don't want to waste a day. Say, oh, listen, it's just a day. Well, look, a day's going to turn into a week into a month into a year into 80 years. Okay. It happens every time. As people say, oh, listen, this day doesn't matter, that day doesn't matter. You don't know what day is the last one, folks. My goodness gracious. You want to be on fire for the Lord, and let's start taking this back. I don't care how old you are. Let's start taking it back. Let's start teaching these children, like our children's pastor at our own church, Steve, when he begins to do that, and his family are working on that, and so many volunteers working in our children's ministry, trying to teach that generation to come up and take our place one day and move forward with God. I pray every night that my future grandchildren, we have one grandchild, but my future grandchildren, all of them will come to know the Lord Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, but not just to say that they're saved, but I want them to be warriors for Jesus. And so that's what this is about, folks. He's like, let's rebuild this wall. And let's be excited about rebuilding this wall. There shouldn't be anything that stands in our way. Look at what Jesus had. Now, of course, Jesus was the Son of God, but he came and he walked as a man. He didn't have the science books out or the math books out. He didn't have a whole lot of money to be working with. He didn't have any kind of thing like that. Resources were, he could have called on anything he wanted to, but he used what he had. And listen, now 2 billion people now, granted, I know not all of them are truly Christians, but 2 billion people across the planet profess to be born-again believers. He did all that with all the stuff that we have today. Think about what we are responsible for today. With every device, every technology that we have, what we're responsible for today. How much more can we get out to the world? How much more can we push out to the world about Jesus simply with the tools we have? People in the 1950s are not responsible for what they did with the internet, okay? We're responsible for that. We're responsible for that. And yes, there's a lot of wickedness on the internet, but how are we using it as a church to get the gospel out? How are we using the tools he's given us? Because we've been given the 5 talents. We've not been given the 1. We've been given the 5 talents. And how are we going to use that to get his gospel out without disappointing and angering the Lord? Folks, it's a possibility. It's a possibility. All right, let's look at this. Verse 18. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. They were ready to do this. They were ready. It was an overwhelming task. It was an overwhelming task. But man, this guy comes in here from nowhere, and he says, look here, I'm ready to see some amazing stuff happen here. I want to see us rebuild these walls. I want to see it's going to take men and women of God. It's going to take men and women of God who are excited about seeing the gospel spread, who simply go into these rooms and say, it's time to spread the gospel. It's time to rebuild walls. Let's rebuild them. Whatever we got to do, let's rebuild. Let's take this back. Let's take this nation back, and let's take it for the Lord. And folks, that may mean that we just have just enough to begin to change our seminaries and begin to change our government, to begin to change and it may take years, and it probably will take years, but we can do this. And somebody needs to come in and motivate us enough. He had wrote all around. He had seen all this. If he could have taken the pictures with his iPhone, he would have. He said, look, here's what we got. He would have sent it to all the people, but instead he met with them in person, and he said, we have got to do everything that we can. We've got to do everything that we can to see these walls rebuilt. But then something happens. They're super excited. They're ready to go. Everybody's fired up and ready to go. But then verse 19 comes in. Oh, my goodness. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, here we go, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that you do? Will you rebel against the king? Now, the king had given them permission. All right? What is going to happen? I've said it so many times on here. What's going to happen when you decide and you're fired up and you're excited to do something for God? What's going to happen? Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem are just around the corner. And they're going to make some hard times for you. Now, these guys were serious hard times. I mean, these guys would threaten with lives and threaten with all these kind of different things. But here's what we got. They said, would you defy the king? Now, wait a second. What do you mean to defy the king? The king gave me permission. But what they're doing is they got a little plan behind them. I mean, that was just wickedness. They're like, oh, yeah. The king gave you permission, all right, but all you're going to do is rebuild this wall, and then you're going to attack the king. Then you're going to rebel against him, and you're going to decide, hey, we got this going on. That's what your plan is. And, I mean, it's on. We are always going to have that opposition. We're going to have that opposition that's coming against us, and that's all they want to do. Geshem wants power. And, look, he was more powerful than Tobiah and Sanballat. He was more powerful. He had more territory. He was in charge of more territory. He was an Arabian leader. And he said, listen, this junk can't happen. How many times do we know the Arabians and all these people, how long are they going to be just a thorn in the side of the Jewish people? And here it is right here in verse 17, 18, and 19, we see an incredible transformation. Everything's getting ready to go. They got their plans ready. They've got the resources ready. Everybody's fired up. Man, they probably have a little party as such, and then all of a sudden Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem all come against them and say, listen, I'm not so sure you need to be doing this. All you're trying to do is defy the king. Folks, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to end with this today. And then actually let me read verse 20, and I'll end with that. Then answered I them and said unto them, listen to this now, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build, but ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Whoa! Hey, here's what we say to the enemy. The enemy's going to send the Sanballats, the Tobiahs, and the Geshems into our life when we're trying to do something big for God. Going to happen. But here's what we say, the same thing that he said. You got no right to this. Why in the world are you even bringing this up? You got no right to this. This is God's plan. This is God's plan. God's the one planning this. You guys, listen, it doesn't have anything to do with you. Whether or not something happens to me or happens to him or happens to her, doesn't even matter. God's going to go through with this plan. And he's going to make it happen somehow, some way. The thing that you don't do at your church, somebody's going to do at theirs. And it's a plan he's put on somebody's heart. The thing that you don't do in your life, somebody's going to do in theirs, and their life is going to go in the right direction, and yours is going to go in the wrong because you chose not to do what God told you to do. And so Nehemiah says, listen, man, none of this is your business. It just gets in faith. None of this is your business. It's not for you to worry about. You don't have any portion in Israel. You don't have any portion in Jerusalem. None of this belongs to you. This is all ours. And so we're going to rebuild this thing. And God's going to be on our side. He already is, and he's going to be on our side. Folks, I'm telling you, the rebuilding of our nation, the rebuilding of our towns, the rebuilding of our cities and states, the rebuilding of our families, the rebuilding of ourselves, God is on our side as long as we are on his. So, folks, that's what we'll talk a little bit more about next week. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm excited because, folks, we can be that team. We can be that team together. We can pray together. We can love each other. We can build together. We can see some amazing stuff happen. And I'm so excited that that's on its way. Love you guys. See you. Bye-bye.